we had to press record, so we didn't start talking about all of the things before we even recorded this podcast. But I want to touch on something at the very top that we just sort of dipped our toes into, and that is being a theater kid and getting to this work coming from the theater.
I could talk about this with you all day long because I think most people, at least when I was growing up, I don't know when you were studying theater, but I went to junior high school and high school performing arts schools. I was a theater major in college. So, like, I've been a theater kid since, I mean, officially, right, since I was like 9 or 10 years old. All I heard growing up was, oh my God, you're going to make no money and it's going to be so hard. And what I love to tell people now, my clients who I work with are looking at MFAs and BFAs just as much as they are like MBAs. And my theater training set me up for success in life. So I love talking about it because it unlocked all the tools that I use now.
Yes. I love that you just mentioned that because that is something. So, same as you, I was in my first show around 9 or 10, and I went to school for theater. I did theater professionally for the first part of my 20s. And I remember when I was starting to veer away from it professionally, some people would ask me, do you ever regret going to school for theater? And I was like, are you kidding me? It's given me all of the life tools that I feel like other people are just catching up to.
Oh yeah. I think the creativity that it unleashes for you, not only as a kid, as a young adult, anytime that you intersect with play, which is what I remember the most about my theater training was it was the absolute essence of play, right? It's like, hey, do you want to make this thing? Hey, do you want to work together to do this thing? I mean, that for me is literally every business meeting that I'm in. I try to bring that energy. But I will tell you for all the theater nerds who might be listening to your program,
There are a lot.
there are a lot. Improv was like just is a huge passion of mine and it was something that I just love doing. And I now use the yes and principle literally in my work every day. I mean, it's how I changed Barbie's body, how we rebranded Disney Princess. The concept in general about the inclusion work that I do is accepting and meeting people where they are and then using yes and to plus up where we can go and to be additive and not reductive. And I have to tell you, it's like it is a strong marketing strategy too. So it's not only just like fun, it can be really practical. But yeah, I'm like a huge, huge, huge fan of playing and performing and learning theater, even if you never do it professionally.
So you went to school for theater and then you started a theater company, correct?
I did. I started a social issue theater company. So just to kind of date me, I'm a full blown Gen Xer, right? So I went to school 80s and 90s. I was in college and it was like early 90s. So I'm not, looking at other people's lives through the internet, which I have to tell you was a huge reason why I started a theater company because I wasn't really comparing myself to where anybody else was because I just didn't know where anybody else was. But in my time at, I went to Penn State University, and at my time as a university student, I got deeply involved in activism, gender equity issues, sexual assault rights, looking at all of these issues that were affecting myself and my friends in the community. And so that was really huge. I was a playwright in college and after college. And so I pulled those storytelling skills together. And while I was an undergrad, we created a theater company that did social issue plays for like orientation and certain awareness weeks and whatnot. But what it gave me was the idea of how to work with a company and how to produce content quickly and how to be a little bit more cutting edge and avant garde in the way that we did, like, theater work. And then how to create talkbacks, Katie, which I know you appreciate.
Oh, yeah.
This is where my hosting, producing, moderating love of conversation came about because after these shows, which could be quite heavy and, obviously dealt with really intense themes, then we created a safe space for the audience to react and respond to what they were hearing. And I have to tell you, for me, that's what really lit me up about my new direction in theater was, oh, I can use this art as a catalyst for dialogue around things that are very hard for people to get into. And I was young doing that. And so I had like all of the ingredients. I didn't know what recipe I was going to make. But when I graduated, and I graduated with 3 degrees that guaranteed me to make no money, I was a women's studies major, classics major, theater major, all the things I loved to study, but didn't know how to apply. And when I graduated and I moved to Indianapolis, I was in love at the time. That's where he was. I went to join him. And I'm like, what am I doing in the Midwest with these like 3 degrees? And how am I going to do something? And I started a local theater company that focused on social health and educational plays for kids. And I mimicked what I had done as an undergrad in a professional setting and then learned how to get grants to underwrite my shows and, work with brands. And actually, I have to say, by like 1995, 1996, and I never heard the word brand before, I was learning how to get companies to pay for art that would inspire kids and young adults to make different health and wellness decisions. And so I feel like I followed my bliss for sure. I did accidentally stumble for myself into a model that then I began as I grew as an entrepreneur to like replicate in my business world. It all started with writing plays about, topics that were near and dear to my heart and impacting the lives of the people I knew.
Was there something that made you say, you know what? I think I'm going to go from writing plays and creating theater to working for companies? Or did that just sort of happen and you realized it when you were looking back?
It's such a good question. And it's an important part of my story that I think now I've been doing this for over 30 years. So sometimes I forget this important intersection. And you just asked a really good question about that. I would say that what happened for me was I loved theater and I had always been a big media junkie too. But again, dating myself, right? I grew up pre-internet. So there's like 4 television networks and you had to watch all the commercials. And, but I loved it. And I always had a curiosity about how media was made and how those stories got told on a larger platform. And what happened for me when I was a young professional, 2 things happened. When I was in college, word got out about my show and the success of the show on campus, and CNN came and covered this on my campus for the first time. And they brought cameras and like a news crew, and they were covering my show live while we were performing it. And it was such an exciting experience to do one modality and then sit down for like a TV interview, which I didn't have any formal training in, but loved the idea that it could get out in the world. And so, of course, that happened. And then I did a program for MTV News when I was a senior in college called MTV News Unfiltered. And it was wonderful. It was like a "You Shoot It, We Air It" news program. You would pitch an idea to MTV about, like, it was a student activism show. It was like, here's the thing I want to solve in my community. And then they would send you cameras. The cameras were literally the size of your kitchen table. They had to be held over the shoulder. We did not have cell phones.
Right.
And so I pitched a story my senior year around institutionalized sexual harassment on the Penn State campus that had been going on for decades. And it was this tradition of streaking that then turned during finals week, that then turned into sexual harassment of women on campus with men grabbing and groping you. And I had had my own experience being grabbed and groped my freshman and sophomore year. And then that's what catapulted me into the activism, is like, this is bullshit. I'm not paying to go to university and get assaulted. So we would do all these programs on campus. Well, I pitched it to MTV and they accepted the story. And they sent me 2 giant cameras and they're like, great, shoot your protest, shoot the rally. We're going to, we're going to do a profile on you. And so I have to, like, I'll send this to you. I'll send you the clip because before MTV went down, I got some of the video back because this is 1994, by the way. And it was not cool to be captured doing things out in the world. Reality TV hadn't taken hold yet. There was a shame that still existed if somebody like captured you on video. So long story short, we announced to the campus that we're shooting this thing for MTV and we're going to shoot these protests. And that night, for the first time in like 20 or 25 years, it was called the Mifflin Mob. It didn't run. It didn't go because word had gotten out that there would be cameras there. And these kids, we were growing up in a time where, like, you didn't want to get caught on camera. Now it'd be like, people don't care, unfortunately. But then it was a stigma. So great solution. Nobody ran. Bad story for MTV because I didn't have any footage of what had happened. And so I then learned with MTV how to produce a segment. I had to go back into the archives with them and find footage and put the piece together. Anyway, we edited it, they edited it, aired it, and it was like a huge success. And I got a lot of interest and offers. I had graduated at that time, but I had gotten a lot of interest and offers to speak about student activism, to do other sorts of TV appearances about it. So I would say that my work in theater merged me into a new medium by the topics that I was covering, right? Because they were newsworthy topics. And then I was dancing in a different art form, which was television news or reality TV, because we're at the early stages of that. And then I think the big, like, real transition before I even got to brands was, it was 1998. I had written a show about school shootings because in 1998, there were 4 or 5 that had happened in the Midwest around me at the time. And that was new news. And then 1999, Columbine happened. And I was out on the road touring with this show. and real life and our imaginary life collided. And I went to Columbine after the shootings. I worked with students. This show, we used it as a modality of healing. I was way out of my depth because I was 26 years old and this was like this national crisis that I was certain was never going to happen again. But what it did for me at that time was it showed me that while I love theater and I loved performing school to school to school, I wanted a bigger platform. Media was my way to do that. And then I decided after that to sell off the theater company and move to Los Angeles and try to figure out a way to work within media, taking what I had learned on the road. And that's actually what led me to brands, because when you start to uncover like who pays for media, brands do, advertising does. And then I was like, who are advertisers? How do you work with them? So I tell you, I benefited from a time, again, pre Google and pre, the ability to get quick answers. And this was my young adult journey as a professional. It was like, I knew what I loved. I knew I had something special. I knew I could create moments with people that mattered. And I wanted more people to see that and be lifted by that and be helped by that. And then I've spent, I feel like the last 20 years, like really figuring out how to do that at scale. And brands are one of the greatest ways to do it at scale. So that is a big part of my journey that isn't in my bio, that I don't talk about a lot, but those were important building and stepping stones for me along the way.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for sharing all of that because also a question that I get a lot, and I'm sure you get a lot as well, is I get questions from people who want to make a difference, make an impact, whether that's global change or in their communities. And they're so overwhelmed at where to start. I just saw the reel on Instagram, and you know the author David White, the poet
Yes,
David White?
of course.
Yeah. So there was a reel of him doing an interview, and he said something like, you know it's your path if it begins to disappear. Like you can't see the other side. And I
I
thought,
saw that too. So I've seen that reel that you're just
yeah.
describing.
I mean, that to me, when people say, especially now because you brought up the internetification of everything, I think what's wonderful is, this idea of you can see it, you can be it. Yes. And if we are following the mold of these people that we call our role models out in the world, we're sort of cosplaying as the people that we want to be instead of doing what you have done and said, you know what, I am going to take all these tools that I have and bring my full self to the stage of my life and follow the breadcrumbs of where that leads.
Yeah. I'm not going to lie. I think part of the nostalgia that I have at times looking back on the earlier parts of my career was certainly the fire you have as like a young college graduate or somebody who's just like hungry to go eat the world and, make your mark. But it was also the fact that I had so much brain space because I was not comparing and despairing against other people's milestones.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing to have so many resources at our hand, and it's a double-edged sword, and that's something that through the work that you've done, I mean, I can say from my own perspective and from what I observe, you have made a difference in the way that people, particularly girls and women and young women, have started to interrogate their relationship with that compare and despair. And I want to get back to the Dove campaign for real beauty and sort of the genesis of all of that. But I'm curious to know when, whether it was the theater company or right now, when it comes to measuring the actual impact of the things that you are doing, how does that happen? How does that work?
I think it depends on what we're doing and who we're doing it with, right? When I was doing the work unsponsored and on my own, my model of impact was a lot in real time, right? How is the audience or the intended recipient experiencing it? What was coming up? I was obviously getting real feedback if I was doing talkbacks after these programs. So I could, and the impact could be pretty palpable. And then, of course, you had kind of like the afterflow of like people who might have taken a minute to think about those things and then took the initiative to reach out and let me know, right? And again, pre-email culture too. So I'm telling you, I've got a file of like real letters that I've had
Yeah.
from,
Faxes. I bet you have
faxes.
faxes.
Yes. So I think I had first person impact results when I was out on the road and more face to face with people. And then of course, like now at the level of career that I'm at, kind of brands and partnerships that I work with, we measure impact through a variety of different matters. I mean, Dove, to give you an example, and we can certainly talk how that all originated, but the wild thing is that we just celebrated 20 years of Dove for Real Beauty. And if you think about it, I guarantee nobody listening could really think of another brand who's stuck with a social impact area for 2 decades. A lot of times people do it for a couple of seasons or they do it as a campaign, but Dove really has championed this space. They've contributed to the research and to like the academic efficacy in this space, but also lives reached. So I think, and this number may vary, but I feel like we're at about 120 million lives reached over the last 20 years. And that's real life. That's like girls or young women or young adults who've experienced our curriculum or our programming or our training in real time, separate from reach you might get from social media or a commercial or a campaign. That kind of scale is only enabled by a brand and a company like a brand like Dove and a company like Unilever, who's put millions and millions of dollars behind the development and the execution of that. But other companies that I work with, Barbie and others, I mean, we look at impact in a lot of different ways, right? We look at impact, obviously, brands make money. So you look at impact on sales. But I like to measure consumer and brand love, Woody, and the relationship that happens, right? When you feel seen, heard, and understood by a brand you also happen to like to engage with, there is a special magic that happens. And people could go back and they could take you into their closet, they could take you into their kitchen, they could take you into their bathroom, and they can talk about the love affairs they have with like certain products. And I know in the capitalism, consumerism of it all, that could be like kind of sickening for some to hear. But what I think about is there are people who run these brands. There are people whose job it is to relay a message about a product. And it's not that I don't care as much about the sales. Of course I do, because I want my partners to do well financially because then we get to do more work. But what I really care about is me and others when I was 12 or when you were, 10, 15, 20, and looking out at the world and not seeing stories that look like yours and not seeing people that look like your family and friends and that isolation and loneliness that can happen when you are not included in the mainstream narrative. And so I measure impact that way as well. I look at the Barbie movie as probably one of the biggest pieces of impact I've had a hand in my career. The fact that I sat in a theater multiple times last year and watched a dance sequence with original Barbie at Margot Robbie, but President Barbie with Issa Rae and a Barbie in a wheelchair and a Barbie with prosthetic limb and a Barbie with natural hair texture, like that is all work that I had been helping with behind the scenes for the brand for the last 14 years. And that became a zeitgeist moment in culture. Little girls and their dads were dressed in pink going to the movies, and women of all ages were rediscovering that joy and play and representation. I sat in the theater and sobbed because I could only imagine. I want to get emotional now, like 8 and 10-year-old Jess with like the wildly curly hair that I didn't know how to navigate, and my tan skin and buck teeth and feeling so ethnically ambiguous and not feeling where I fit into the world, looked up at this screen and saw all this beautiful representation and then knew that I had a relationship to that. I was probably one of the most proud moments of my life because I was channeling the impact of like what that could have done for me as a young girl when I was such doubt and such despair.
Yeah. What legacy type of moment. And side note, my husband, Jeremy, has now watched the Barbie movie 3 times on his own.
Hey,
Like you two would love each other, but I've like gone out to go, I don't know, teach a spin class before, and he'll have gotten his bagel and he'll turn on a movie and I'm like, "Are you watching Barbie again?" And so it's not just impact and legacy for the girls and women who are looking at Barbie and looking at that representation, but also including other communities, particularly men, and showing like this is the type of worlds that we could live in. Isn't that amazing? We're coming up on, we're in an election year. We're coming up very closely on an election. And the Kamala Harris campaign has gotten a lot of press around being very joyful and
Yes.
very hopeful. And some of the, how do I say this nicely? Some critics will say that joy is unserious, hope is unserious. But if you look at a movie like the Barbie movie and you look at even just box office impact
Yep.
of that movie, people want to feel joy and hope and then feel like they can do something with it.
Yeah, I think, listen, I don't think joy is unserious. I think joy is one of the necessary emotions that we are intended to feel and deserve to feel. And I think, quite frankly, culturally, especially here in the US, we have been robbed of so much of that over the last 8 or 9 years for a variety of reasons, political, pandemic, and beyond. And I think that what we're sensing is this collective sigh that there is another way to do things. And that's also at the core of what drives me in my work and in my life these days is just trying to those systems of oppression or those systems of beliefs, even for our own belief systems, right? That hold us back or hold us to a place that we don't want to be in anymore. And I think what we see when we see a lot of negativity is actually the refusal of progress. I think the fear that comes, to me, inclusion efforts are not a net sum game. It's not a pie. There's enough to go around. Everybody gets a piece. There is enough abundance to be seen, heard, loved, and understood for who you are. And I feel like the closer we can get to that, Katie, the more joy we're going to feel because we're cutting off parts of ourselves too. I think
Yes.
joy is a right for us to feel.
Yes. As you were saying that, Jess, I was thinking because, negativity and fear and hate and all of these very strong emotions, they exist for a reason. Like evolutionarily, we needed to know that we weren't going to get eaten by a bear that was chasing us, or that we wouldn't die by eating poisonous berries. We needed fear. And as you were talking, I was like, wow, joy is harder. And so I wonder if that's why people are more resistant to it, because it requires you to live in that gray, murky space of holding so many complex truths at the same time and actively choosing joy, whereas fear comes instinctually to us. So
Yeah.
of course we're going to bond over that.
Well, you and I share our beloved Karen Walren as a friend, mentor, and fellow artist. And what I loved about the Lightmakers Manifesto, the book she wrote, was also about finding joy in those difficult moments and activism, right? And I got to do an interview with her in that book as well around like, how do you, when you're fighting for change or you're out in the world, connect to that joy? I think joy makes us really vulnerable because I know for me, when I am feeling good, and this could be like part of my past trauma, this could also be part of like how I'm just raised and socialized. It's like I am waiting for the other shoe to. When does this end? When does this good feeling go away? When is the bad news going to happen? Right? It's like I can tend to catastrophize so much that I feel safe in that kind of thinking. Like, oh boy, this can't be great. And what I've started to do is I have a habit in the morning where I try to write just a page a day. I used to write for like 15 minutes and then it would be like 5 minutes and then it would be like 30 seconds. So I'm just like, okay, I'm going to commit to a page and it's not even a big page. It's just like a medium sized page. But
You don't do morning pages, you do morning page
I did
and
morning
maybe
page,
a paragraph.
maybe a paragraph. And sometimes I'll just write in really big letters on the page. But I try to do a page and just dump in the morning because what I find is like when I am able to reframe my language, that I'm speaking is often obviously comes from what I think, what I speak, how I act. And what I've started to do instead of catastrophizing, like, oh my gosh, well, what if this doesn't work out, is play with the what if it all works out? What if this is like the most amazing interview I've ever done, which is great, by the way. And and what if this actually works out in my favor? And what I found that it did was it invited breath in. Like instead of holding my breath, I was like expanding my breath and I was getting to imagine really fun things. And I think that's really important because it tempered the vulnerability. There's always a vulnerability that someone's going to come take your joy away. But I feel like joy isn't a one and done. We get to choose it, have it, experience it. But I think recognizing it is so important because now I become like a joy seeker. I'm like, ooh, I like that moment. I want that moment again. And it's not because it made everything perfect. It's because for me, it brought me back into a sense of peace, centeredness in myself because I can have a variety of feelings and they don't all have to be bad.
Yeah, it's sort of like embracing a let's see mentality of, I don't know, this might be awful. It might be the most joyous thing ever, but let's see. Let's
Right.
find out. And if I hate it, I'll never do it again. And
Exactly.
if I love it, let's get some more of that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
This is actually a perfect segue into what I said like 10 minutes ago. I said that we were going to talk about it and then we talked about something else. But whether it's going back to your sort of brand work origin story with Dove, because it's the 20-year anniversary, or it's looking into maybe some of the other brands that you've worked with since then. I mean, I think of Dove because I think of the time period. I think of the early 2000s, and I think of the conversations around body image and mental health that were going on during that time, and why that commercial and why that ad campaign, and people who have been listening to this podcast for a while are like, oh my God, Katie, are you going to tell that story again? But why that was so impactful for me is because I was in the middle of my own struggles with eating disorders, body issues. And I knew that there was something that was up with me because I was starting to lose my voice, my singing voice as a musical theater major. And so I was like, I have to get to the bottom of this. And I saw that commercial in 2007. And I was like, this is revolutionary. The fact that a mainstream ad campaign was saying that it was not only okay, it was embraced to say, oh, I'm amazing. I love myself and I love myself exactly the way I am. That maybe to people who are listening to this now in 2024 might seem like it's old hat, but I saw that in 2007. It was truly revolutionary. And I would love to talk about maybe some key challenges, whether that was an internal challenge or an external challenge, that might have happened along the way as you were starting to do this more truly revolutionary work and saying things that just weren't being said and selling joy in an environment where people were selling, tearing each other and themselves down.
100%. So yeah, let's go in the way, way back machine to when that campaign started was actually a couple years prior to when you saw the spot. It was 2004. And it's funny how I even got connected to Dove, right? Because I, at that point, had then moved to Los Angeles. I was writing a body image column for 17 magazine, actually called the Body Piece column. I had written for Cosmo Girl. I was the advice columnist for Mary Kay and Ashley Olsen. So I was like really in their website. I was really embedded in the young women's communities around body image and eating disorders, and also sharing my own body image issues and eating disorders growing up. That was a huge motivation for me to stay in that conversation, right? That was a part of my healing. And because of the public profile at that time for me of having these conversations with young people all over the world, I was approached by Dove as they were beginning to embark upon this territory. And I think because they were a brand at that time that didn't really talk, well, they didn't talk to girls directly, but they had this really compelling research they were trying to understand. And the research said that 2% of women worldwide would consider themselves beautiful. Just 2% of women. And then when I got a hold of that intel and started working with them, we went back and we asked women, well, what could we do to make you change your mind about that? And the feedback that we got was, don't worry about me. I already feel the way I feel about myself. Go and help the next generation. Please help my daughter to not feel this way. Please help my niece or my granddaughter to think differently about her beauty. And that was the unlock for the territory that we've been in with Dove for a while, which is looking at generational relationships to beauty, how it gets passed down, the messages that women and girls receive. And as you said, you had a beautiful language, I think earlier about like interrogating and that. And I would call that also that like media literacy, critical thinking skill that we've been working on with Dove. And so when I embarked upon that relationship, it was quite transformative for me for like three reasons. I think number one, I at that time was like, what is a soap company doing talking about self-esteem? So if you want to talk about a challenge, I would say the first challenge for me was skepticism of what does this brand and this product have to do with this very important topic? And then I met the people brand at the time who were doing it. They were majority of them parents who had been seeing and experiencing this in real time. They were smart marketers who understood they had uncovered a really important human truth that they had an opportunity to help with. And I think for me, like the challenge at the time was it was and it is revolutionary because they were also the first brand to kind of tell on their own industry. Because if you remember, they were the first ones to really come out and define and share photoshopping and retouching, which had often been an industry secret as to how those cover girls looked flawless because they had gone through somebody's filter. And usually those photo editing skills were relegated to professional editors. We didn't have Photoshop on our computers and our phones yet. So there was a barrier of access to those tools. And the modern consumer at the time didn't know what they had done after you took those photos to make your thighs thinner and your waist smaller and your hair longer. And when Dove chose to be brave and share what goes on behind the scenes, I think that's why you felt it so strongly as a recipient, because the intention behind the campaign and the work and the self-esteem curriculum was born from the right place, I believe. And I'm so happy to have had a seat at the table at that time. But the challenge, of course, was that was a very new cultural conversation. You know, it was mind-blowing, but also, where do we go from here? Like, what does that mean if we tell on retouching and airbrushing? What does it mean about our own beliefs in beauty? And, and can they sell more products? Can they connect to consumer in that way? And so there were lots of like business risks, but I think the social risk was, what will this mean? Like, you can't just tell women that and then leave them without tools, and tell girls that they should feel more beautiful, but not tell them how we can maybe help shape that thinking. So I think the challenge there was like gaining credibility as to why they were invested in this space beyond commercial reasons, making sure that they had folks like myself and so many others, by the way, who work with the brand with various levels of expertise to help shape and make sure that they're accountable to the real people who, suffer with these issues. And then also, I think, thing that we cannot underestimate is that the brand themselves and the leaders at that time, and still to this day, they've not stopped. They've not stopped doing it. The consistency has been so important, because the changes we said we wanted to see in women, that doesn't happen overnight. And in fact, our research shows us over the last 20 years, that number at 2% hasn't changed that much, Katie. Like, that's the really hard part of it all. We've done beautiful work and maybe that number's doubled or tripled, but there is still, because technology has changed and and there's so many other reasons why it's not just for Dove to solve, but the challenges will always remain. We live in a fast paced world. We consume a tremendous amount of technology. There is a beautiful thing about us being able to communicate through a screen, and there is a terrible thing about us living our lives through screens, where we are, able to compare and despair at a much higher rate. And for young people to have so much information without their prefrontal cortexes being fully formed and their ability to discern fully developed, it's getting complex. So anyway, this is the longest answer to the a really smart question. Challenges are there all the time when you set out to shift culture. And that's what I tell my brand partners all the time. Like, this will never be a straight line. In fact, it shouldn't be a straight line, or else somebody should have solved that already. What you're on is a very beautiful, circuitous journey to change culture, one person at a time, a product at a time, and a conversation at a time. And it's cumulative. And most brands and most people in general don't stay the course. And so I'm happy that we're still on this journey 20 years later. It's exhausting. I wish we were having the same conversations. It's kind of annoying.
Yeah, it would be nice to have moved to a different rung. However, that's exactly what I want to talk on, is the longevity of sticking with something that is so meaningful for so long. Because if you're someone who's driven to make a change in the world, there are a lot of factors in the world that will come up against you and tell you that, okay, great, that's cute, that's nice, but maybe sit down. And so it takes a lot of tenacity and energy mentally and emotionally and physically to keep going. So whether it's for you or with the clients that you work with, what is something that you would either say to yourself or say to other people when it comes to staying the course with something that is a little more obtuse, like shifting a cultural narrative?
Yeah, I think that's really important, because I would say my advice ebbs and flows as I grow and change. I think that the stage of life that I'm at right now, I'm in my 50th year of being on this planet. And I think in my earned wisdom, what I would say now is, for me, it requires a regularly consistent check-in about my vision and my values. Am I behaving with integrity in a way I believe for myself is what I need right now? Because so much of my life has been exteriorly focused, right? On winning approval or winning hearts and minds or love or the job or the thing. Everything just lived slightly outside of myself for very long. And I think what I have discovered in a lot of self work and a lot of professional help and community support is I have this barometer, my North Star, my thing I know keeps me feeling safe and grounded and connected to who I am as a person, despite my work, my title, the number of, you know, dollars in my bank account, all of the things that we can tend to measure our existence by. So I would say what keeps me on track is a constant checking in of, and I do it a couple of different ways. I do this thing called a vision, values, and mission or an action exercise, which is like about every 6 months, I just check in. I write down like, what's my 30,000-foot vision of my life right now, right? Like when I just look out and dream big before I get out of bed in the morning, what am I seeing? And sometimes I see like an image, but oftentimes now it's really interesting. I'm not as goal. So I have some goals, but I'm not as goal focused as I used to be. I'm feeling focused. I'm like, I want to feel connect. I want to feel creative. I want to feel safe. I want to feel, and I follow those feelings now. And so my vision has become like a feeling vision in a way. And I just go with it because it helps guide me. And then my values for me are my non negotiables. They're just things like if you came to me and said, okay, Jess, I have everything you think you want in your life right here in this bag of tricks, but you're going to have to betray the three things that you hold most dear. And in order to get these things, and then I could tell you, no way, I'm not doing it. And my three non negotiables right now are authenticity, fluidity, and creativity. So for me, I have to be authentic to myself and my desires. I need to be flexible and fluid. It's partly why I'm an entrepreneur, and I need to be creative. And that kind of, goes back to the start of our story and our origin and love. So I share all of this because I think, I'd like to have more contrite advice, but the truth is, my ability to center myself changes as my life changes, as my experience shift. And what I now know to be true in answering this question, I have to check in with me. What is my vision and my values? Am I doing things that align with those? I focus on that first before I focus on the goal, even in moments with my clients or cultural change moments. I try to ground all the people I work with and advise and consult. We all do North Star work, brand work. We all do because if not, then you're chasing something that's been fabricated and there's no real gut connect to it, and you're easily swayed off course if you don't actually know why you're doing what you're doing. So it's a long way around saying, it's a gut check-in. It's a belief system that I have had to develop and separate from what I think society wants for me, what I think I should be doing. God, did I let the shoulds rule my life for so long? And now and it looks different now. And sometimes when you do an inner compass work and you kind of focus on what you really want, you don't broadcast that to the world, and it's not Instagrammable and it's not easily digested by other people. And so you have to feel really good of like, all right, I've got my North Star. Not everyone in the world needs to know what it is. I get to know what it is. The people that are closest to me know. And then where I get the payoff is I act in integrity and my life feels aligned in the way that makes me feel good and safe and all the things that matter to me.
Mm, I love that. And you have so many amazing resources on that I'll link all of those in the show notes. And also, you've worked with She's the First, right? Kristen
Yes,
and Tammy. Yeah.
sure.
So Kristen is a dear friend of mine. She's been on the pod and she did a whole episode around finding your North Star. So
Yes,
I'm pretty sure we talked about you too. We've been in each other's orbit a lot.
we have been. I'm so happy that we're now directly connected, but they are beautiful examples of folks who help you build your North Star and your impact, right? They wrote that beautiful book about impact, and I recommend it to anybody I can. And yeah, I mean, and that's the other thing, community. Actually, you bring that up. You have these great people in common. I have to tell you, like, as an entrepreneur, something I'm thinking about a lot lately, because as an entrepreneur, you always have people around you. But you tend to work pretty solo as you're building, and for lots of reasons, either you can't afford a team, or you're kind of like walking upstream trying to solve a problem. You're building something. For a long time, I have felt untethered from my community in a way that when I started to reconnect and realize the great wealth of the people around me and ask for help and reach out and connect in those ways, community has maybe that will be my new non-negotiable, because I think the way I feel when I'm in community with other like-minded people, like better than any drug I've ever tried.
Yeah. And it is pretty amazing how, I mean, I I am a people person, but I'm an introvert. Like I'm an INFJ. I mean, I start the day with high battery because I'm by myself, and then at the end of the day, I am like the car is puttering and can't really even get to the side of the road anymore. But what's cool is I found when you start to find community, I mean, us just talking right now is a great example. When you start to find people who are in the same mindset and share the same values and you can be in community with, even if it's one conversation, one coffee meeting, then you start to realize like, oh, this person knows this person and they know this person and this person. And then it's like you don't just know this one person anymore. They're connected to all of these other people who have been in your orbit for years.
Yeah. And I think one of the things, I don't know if you feel the same way about this, but I think one of the things that social media or having sort of like internet friends and relationships can do, and there are lots of great things it can do, but I find sometimes like, when you're consuming other people's lives through 30-second clip or a minute and a half reel or, whatever, right? We're always filling in the blanks of what we think their life is like. And we can then create this narrative of what our life is not like and then what's missing. And it's in that delta that I find depression. It's in that delta of like my assuming what your life is like based on that post that I make up all these stories about what I'm not doing and blah, blah, blah. And what I find when you're actually in community and conversation and relationship is you get reminded that actually your problems are pretty similar to other people's problems. And we're all sort of struggling and walking our way home through different things. And I don't think we can underscore that enough, especially in the digital age, and especially all of us kind of coming out of the pandemic where we were deeply disconnected from each other for so long in person, that real authentic connection is just for me like an undeniable important part of my health and well-being, because otherwise left to my own devices and a screen for a couple hours, it gets pretty dark in there.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Pivoting from the dark to the
Yeah.
light, I want to ask,
Yes.
I know that we're
Good.
coming up on time. You're gonna have to come back on the Wantcast so we can just
Happily.
keep
Happily.
gabbing.
Good.
But I want to end on a energizing, positive, proactive note before I ask you all of the questions that I ask everybody at the end of every episode. You are so tapped into what is happening in culture and the cultural zeitgeist, particularly when it comes to self-esteem and the way that we view ourselves in the greater global community. Are there any trends or maybe even like let's go there, technology or innovations that you're particularly pumped about?
Such a good question. Well, look, the big topic on everybody's mind is how are we going to engage with AI and what is AI going to do for us? I'm looking at AI, especially because I'm a digital adapter, because I'm a Gen Xer and I did not grow up with technology. And it's definitely a learning curve for me all the time. But you're right, germane to the work that I do, I've got to stay kind of present on things. And I've got great people on my team who understand this in different ways than I do. But what I will say that I'm looking at is the impact that AI will have on our relationships, going back to this piece, right? So I do like to look at the positive side of our technological advances because look, the toothpaste is out of the tube. It's not going back in. What I find can be so interesting because AI is based on the input that we create for that technology. We keep talking about how if we're not conscious of it, we're going to recreate all of these negative, right? Like systems and databases of knowledge. But what I get excited about is like this grand cultural universal chance to redefine the intelligence that we have, to redefine the way that people see and find themselves and find each other. I think for communities worldwide that are deeply disconnected, that are not, I feel like there's going to be a lot of bridges built with AI. That makes me excited because I think access, I think support, resources will be important. So I think holistically as a technology, as a future leaning trend, I think everybody's trying to figure out like how do I intersect with it? I look at it possibility of who else can we connect to? Who else can we invite? How do we create like a brand new database of knowledge that could counter some of the biases that we have currently in the culture that we live in? And I would say the other thing that I'm like looking at that I think is really important is, and this is actually a good side of technology, but it is this like reverse mentoring that's happening right now because our young kids and young women in particular, our digital natives are growing up online and having access like to information resources and leaders that their parents didn't have. And I'm finding a lot of moms like my age or slightly older or slightly younger early recipients of the Dove campaign without understanding how those images were made, and they kind of absorbed all of this beauty and body image messaging. I'm finding that a lot of young women are actually helping to educate and reframe diet culture for their parents. And the
Mm.
opportunity, like, there's a great, if you go into these, like, if you could teach your algorithm on TikTok to go and look at all these great, like, Gen Zers and young millennials who are helping their moms better navigate media and understand that, like, the Kellogg's commercial, sorry, Kellogg's, of like you pinch an inch and you're like pinching your stomach back in like the 80s, which is horrifying. Go look it up. Some of the messaging that they grew up with, they're helping their moms balance that. They're helping them like do media literacy. So I think what makes me excited too is the reverse mentoring and the creativity that's going to come out of a generation who knows how to use technology and knows how to tell these stories in such a profound way and can help educate up and down the generations. So I think that's an interesting multi-generational trend that I'm looking at personally, and that I'm also like looking at for my brand partners.
Yeah. Oh, damn. That is a good one. That is a big one. Jess, you are freaking amazing. And I am so honored to have had you on the Wantcast today. If people want to find you, find out more about you, find out more about the work that you do, where can people find you?
I am easily findable. Have a website if we use those anymore. Its name is jessweiner.com. And then I'm on Instagram at I'm Jess Weiner. I'm on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn, by the way. If you're in that space, I love LinkedIn. And I'm still on, I will always call it Twitter, but I'm still there just because I like the snark. But yeah, I think best way is through those channels.
Awesome. Okay. So the first question I would love to ask you is, when do you feel the most like yourself?
Ooh, okay. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is I'm a Scorpio and I love water. And I feel most like myself in a pool or in a hot tub or in a bathtub. Like I am, it's like everything exterior melts away and I'm like a little mermaid. I love, and when I'm around water, I feel all those things. I feel fluid. I feel feminine. I feel connected. Some people get that with mountains and trees and hiking. I get that with water, pool, less so beach, definitely hot tub or bathtub.
Mm, love it. And I love the clarification too. Not beach, no sand.
I do love beach.
We
I
like
love
the
being on the
jets.
beach, but I'm not going in the ocean, y'all. I will ride on the ocean. I just respect all the babies that live in the ocean. I mean, I love the beach.
Right.
For me, I just a good hot bath in a soaking tub, or I have a beautiful hot tub, thankfully, in my life that I could disappear for hours. And that is when I'm feeling most me because I'm in flow.
Ooh, such a good answer. Okay. Next question. This can be a kind of loaded word for some people, but I would love to know, what is your definition of positivity?
Mm. You know, I feel like for me, when I was telling you, like, I'm being guided right now by like what I want to feel, positivity for me feels like lightness. It feels like ease. It feels like effortlessness. Feels like flow. It feels like alignment. I think we think about positivity in like the toxic positivity ways sometimes, of like putting on a smile even though you don't feel it. But for me, positivity feels hopeful and light and freeing, actually. So I don't know that is what it conjures for me. And then I think it also then grounds me because that hopefulness and that alignment feels authentic and feels like a connection.
Mm, I love it. I love that both of your answers were so feelings based.
Yeah.
And then the last question. So I define fearlessness as when the fear you have of the situation, of the thing, whatever it is, when the fear is less than the faith that you have in yourself. So it's an equation. Fearlessness is when the fear is less than the faith. Taking that equation into mind, Jess Weiner, when do you feel fearless?
When I am in attunement and alignment with my husband, who is my rock and best friend and partner that I feel lucky enough to have found in this life, much later in life, by the way. We should talk about that another episode. Because in that relationship, I know I'm being fully held and supported and seen. And that allows that fear to dissipate for me. I've been braver in this relationship. I've faced deep, deep fears in this relationship, not because he's solved them or fixed them or propped me up in some way, but because he's been a container and he's held space for me to have both the fear and the fearlessness.
That is so beautiful. And it sounds like he enhances everything that you are, and I'm sure you do the same to him. Just as you've enhanced all of us and who we are. Thank you